Welcome to Alienating the Audience, a science fiction program that often pratfalls directly into science. I'm Andrew Heaton, the thinking man's nerd, and today, by God, we're gonna talk about how to build a giant robot. Grab a AA battery and a positronic brain, and let's go! Today we are joined by Stephen Granade. He is a scientist, physicist? Physicist. He's a physicist specifically, and he is also a science communicator. And I think we have mutual friends that I didn't even get in contact with. But don't you know Muhammad Noor and Aaron McDonald and some of those folks?
I do. I have dragged them to do science talks and events at Dragon Con, which is a science fiction convention where I organize the science track. And we've taken our show on the road to some other cons as well.
I am thrilled that I now apparently know the cool kids table at Dragon Con because somebody turned me on to you, Stephen. That's one of the listeners of the program. They tweeted and they were like, "You should reach out to this guy." But I don't think it was any former guest. So I'm delighted that apparently there is like a squadron of people that do this, and I'm just inadvertently meeting all of you.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a relative coolness. Like, we'd still get beat up in a regular cafeteria.
Right. Yeah. But within the people at Dragon Con, you're at the VIP table. Like if we're going to like a soccer hooligan riot, I'm pretty sure we're all dead.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, Dragon Con's been interesting because, of course, a lot of people go for cosplay. A lot of people go to meet various actors and writers. But there are also folks who will go specifically to hear stuff about science. Mm-hmm. Like, they will take time out of their day at Dragon Con to come hear talks about black holes or gravitational waves or, the psychology of superheroes. And it's just really neat.
Yeah, that sounds great. Does Bill Nye hang out there? Because I feel like you and he are in the same realm as science communicators, right? We kind of broadly, like you and Neil deGrasse Tyson and him, you're all kind of in the same category?
Broadly speaking, although two of those are a household name and I am not. But I think it's the same sort of approach of saying there is science and you can love that and you can find science in a lot of unexpected ways. And I really like being able to invite people to come along and say, look, I really love science and there are things that you really love, and let's see how those sort of go together.
Yeah. And we spoke briefly before hopping on the call today. So in addition to being a physicist, I think you're like a joint theater major / physics PhD guy. One of those, the many people.
We're everywhere.
Right. Yeah. You can't, whenever I meet an actor and they're like, I'm an actor. I'm like, oh, are you an actor or are you a PhD physicist or a day job? That's, generally they go hand in hand. And I believe you've done, if you haven't done direct contract work for NASA, you're at least in Huntsville and doing interesting stuff down there involving robotics and alloys and words that I don't understand.
Yes, I've gotten to do some work with NASA as a contractor, which was incredibly neat. I got to design some optical equipment that I helped put together and is right now on the back end of Hubble.
Cool.
So I always wanted to be an astronaut, but my eyes are awful, so that wasn't going to happen. But having things up in space is a pretty good consolation prize.
Yeah, that's you were definitely at the cool kids table, Stephen. Should I call you? I feel like we're very casual, but would I properly call you Dr. Stephen Granade? If we're throwing around formalities?
Stephen is great because my dad is he is Dr. Granade. He's a historian. So I grew up with him as Dr. Granade. And so hearing myself called Dr. Granade always feels weird.
Although I guess Dr. Granade is a great superhero name. Like I feel like Dr. Granade would be like the one-off in a Fantastic Four comic book where they're fighting Dr. Grenade. Well, so I'll say the thing you and I are going to talk about today is giant robots, a subject that I am thrilled to talk about because they are on the coolness end of the sci-fi body. I thought about it. Now, I know that you did a talk at Dragon Con on the science of Pacific Rim. Alas, I have not seen Pacific Rim. It looked very action thriller to me when it came out, and I didn't go see it. That said, though, I thought about it, and giant robots are proliferate throughout science fiction. They're not always the central core of a thing, but there's Pacific Rim, there's Iron Giant, there's is it Gungan or Gungam? There's like an anime category that has like a lot of giant robots in it.
Yeah, you get those. You get Macross. You got Neon. Genesis Evangelion. There's just lots of giant robots here, there, and yon.
Yeah, or like even just for anybody that's kind of on the cusp of sci-fi nerddom, like even Star Wars. There's the AT-ATs. There's Imperial Walkers. They're at least they're kind of the megafauna version of robots.
Right. That's an excellent term for it.
Yeah, they're in the moose category as opposed to the squirrel category.
Yeah.
It's so I was thinking about it. Like if I were in charge of the military. Like we would have nothing but dirigibles and giant robots. Those would be the only form you would, and we'd probably have like some kind of space force. But basically, you'd either be on a spaceship, in a robot, or in a blimp. Those would be the only three things I can do. And it made me go, well, how come we don't have them? I assume the main reason we don't rely on giant robots is I assume wheels just are less likely to trip on stuff. So it's better to have a tank.
Wheels are definitely nicer in terms of it's harder to fall off if you've got your wheels spaced properly. I remember I would occasionally make fun of AT-ATs in the way that they stomp around with their giant feet. I'm like, who would ever do something like that? And then a couple of years ago, the robotics company Boston Dynamics came out with their line of robots that have legs, like they've got 4 legs, because dealing with very, very uncertain and uneven terrain, you can sort of get into the Dalek problem where they're like, oh no, stairs, what do we do? Whereas if you've got a robot with legs, it can start to do some of the things that other like dogs and cats and other quadrupeds can do.
Yeah, well, and I always thought that even if like Afghanistan, I don't know if we're still doing it, but there was a period like within the last 15 years where we were sitting in horses because if you were going up into the mountains, like you couldn't roll a tank up there, you couldn't have a four-wheeler necessarily, but a horse can maneuver pretty well. Right.
So there are like advantages to occasionally having robots with legs, and that was something that I thought would be very difficult to solve, and I'm guessing it was, but Boston Dynamics is able to have these robots that don't look spooky at all, running around and dancing, and they're like, oh, these are the things that are going to kill us when the Terminator future arrives.
I think the most glorious video I've seen in the last year, and I don't know the context of it, it's just an old-timey stagecoach and a really delighted guy in a top hat playing stagecoach driver, and the whole thing's being pulled by a Boston Dynamics robot horse, like a headless robot horse. Like it was just surreal looking, like Victorian robot combo. And I was like, I don't know what they're doing, but we should fund it, and we should double the funding for it.
Right.
So then, great. So we already know that there are situations in which it would be better to have bipedal or quadrupedal robots than tank wheels, depending on the terrain and that kind of thing. So let's talk about the giant element of it, because I feel like that's the kicker. Right. I could probably, if me and some friends had like a sufficient amount of scrap metal, we could build a robot that kills people. Like I think give it some time. I think we could make it work. Like I've fired a potato gun. I think I could do it. Right. But making one like 3 stories tall. That seems like an order of a different magnitude.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting that so many of us instantly jump to the idea of robots, but make them big. Like we just really want to see these giant robots around. We want to see the megafauna of the robot world. But physics starts to cause you problems when you start talking about robots but big. It turns out that scaling things up in size have a lot of knock-on effects that you don't necessarily think about until they're pointed out to you. I certainly didn't until I had a professor. When I mentioned giant robots, like, okay, so here's what's going to make them very, very difficult. And most of it comes down to something that's called the square cube law.
Nice. So lay it on me.
There is math involved. So we talk about making something bigger, and you can say, all right, I'm going to have a robot that's, 4 feet or 5 feet tall. Okay. Now I'm going to turn that into a robot that's 50 feet tall. So it's now 10 times as tall. Well, that has some interesting ramifications, because you can ask about, well, how much more of their foot do they have to be on the ground? So if the height goes up by 10, then anything that has to do with area, if you can think about taking a line and then turning that into a square, the amount of square that you get goes up by 100. It is 10 times 10, or the square of 10. But then you say, well, how much more does it weigh? And that's a measure of how much stuff is in the robot. And that has to go with volume. So you can think about taking the square and then expanding that so that it's a cube. So if the height increases by 10, then surface area increases by 10 times 10, which is 100. And the volume increases by 10 times 10 times 10, or 1,000. So there is 10 times as much weight going on the same area of the feet. So you have to have so much more stronger feet. You look at mice have little tiny feet, and then you scale something up to an elephant, and all of a sudden you've got these thick tree trunk legs because they've got to spread out so much more weight over that area.
So just to make sure that I'm following you then, in theory, if we were to make we could snap our fingers and make an elephant-sized mouse, would the bones then not be proportional? Like, because in my mind, I'm having never thought about this before. I'm just assuming that if you made a shoebox-sized elephant, it would more or less have the same bone to volume ratio as a mouse, and vice versa. But you're telling me that's not how it works. The larger you get, it's not just scalability, but the actual structural mechanics of the skeleton have to alter as well.
Absolutely.
Got it. Okay.
Because if you take me from 6 feet to 60 feet, now my feet have to deal with 10 times the amount of pressure because of the way the weight would scale up. It becomes a problem for heat because all of your cells are producing heat, and so they've got to let that heat go away or else you're going to cook. So you sweat, you radiate heat, all of those kinds of things happen. All of that's got to go over your skin. Well, the skin is an area. It's like having a sheet draped over your body. So if I make myself, 10 times as tall, now all of that heat has to go out of a much smaller ratio of skin. So I have to, just like my feet have to deal with 10 times the amount of pressure, now my skin has to get rid of 10 times the amount of heat proportionately. So you could end up cooking yourself.
So I don't know about robotics very well, but one of the greatest ongoing pub debates of my life. This is one of my conversation openers when I meet somebody. Is if every animal on the planet were the size of a shoebox, which one would win in a fight? And I am very much on Team Honey Badger. I think a honey badger would unquestionably win if every animal on the planet were the size of a shoebox. One of the strong contenders in these pub battles that I get into is what about ants? Ants can lift, so much more. And my theory has been I think there must be some kind of scalability issue for certain organisms. So, for example, I don't know this, but my guess is if you had a hummingbird the size of an eagle, its heart would explode so much that the bird would blast apart into 3 different states. That's my guess.
Oh, I'm with you entirely. Like if you look at how animals' metabolism runs and how fast their heart goes, when you're talking about a mouse, their heart beats very, very fast. You go up to an elephant and it beats very, very slow. The whole thing is just slower. Mice will scamper around, elephants kind of plod around, and some of that is just a function of being that large. So if you scaled an ant up to shoebox size, unfortunately, you're not going to get like the 1950s them kind of movies. Instead, they're just going to crush themselves under their own weight, and it will be really messy.
Yeah, it's just be a very sad, goopy, giant mouse corpse. And then I would assume then that it basically works the same with the robot. So in addition to having to do with weight, and having like if we have a robot the size of a Statue of Liberty, the feet now have to deal with just an ungodly amount of weight in order for that to walk around. But then on top of that, the lubricant we need in order to keep the thing going would be, the size of like a pool in terms of volume. And then I hadn't thought about heat, but that makes a lot of sense too. If there are various generators that are moving this thing, then the heat in it would have to have like incredible air vent systems. So basically, the larger we make it, it's not just a question of more resources. It's a question of actually being able to cope with the scale of the machine.
Yes, absolutely. And your point about engines and heat is an important one. Anytime you're working with any kind of electronic system, especially one that's going to have a mechanical component, you've got to figure out what do you do with the heat. That's one of the main things that car manufacturers have to figure out is what are we going to do with all the heat of the engine? So scale everything up, require more energy, you're going to put out a lot more heat, and you're going to have to get rid of it somehow if you don't want to bake all of the electronics and presumably the pilot, because you got to have a pilot. Like right. Giant robots are no fun if you don't have a pilot inside.
Yeah.
You got to do something with all that heat.
Yeah. Well, and like that, and that brings me to the concept of a fuel source for a giant robot. So like I haven't watched Mech Warriors, but I love the fan art from Mech Warriors. Mm-hmm. I love I have spent I'm embarrassed to say this, I've spent several hours just Googling the term steampunk robot to see what comes out. I think that might be my, some people like cubism, some people like modern art. I love oil paintings of reimagined Victorian robots. And they look cool because they have these giant smokestacks billowing smoke. But I'm thinking if you had even like a 10-foot tall, kind of one-man mech robot type thing, and it was coal powered, the amount of coal you would have to burn in that to have like a locomotive furnace style that could actually move it around would be just incredible, right? Like you'd have to have a dump truck of coal behind you at all times.
Yeah. One of the things that you ask if you're working with a system that you're going to need to pull energy, take some sort of fuel source and convert that into energy, is how much energy can you get out of, say, a pound of the stuff that you're going to use? And it turns out we call that energy density. Uh-huh. How much, if I take a lump of this material, how much energy will I get out? And it turns out this is one of the reasons why gasoline is so helpful, as awful as the things that it does to the environment is, because it's incredibly energy dense. Coal is far less energy dense, which is why we don't have a lot of coal-powered things anymore, besides, coal soot. You can get it in quantity. You can run power stations off of it because of that, but it's not as useful for smaller car-sized devices and similar.
Right. Because
if you really want to jump up the next level in energy density, then you start talking about, well, can I use fission? Can I have uranium and split the atom? Because I get a lot of energy out of that, which is why you get nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and nuclear-powered submarines.
Yeah, that's great. Because if I can't have a steam-powered robot, I'd prefer to have a nuclear robot.
Right. And those can produce a tremendous amount of energy, although you've got all of the problems of shielding and the control systems and all of that tend to add weight. The next big jump in fuel would be if we could, instead of splitting atoms apart, if we could shove them together in fusion the way that the sun does.
We've figured that out, except we can only do it to make explosions, right? Like we have mastered fusion in terms of blowing stuff apart.
That's an interesting use of the word master. We can certainly light a fuse and run away, but in terms of a controlled fusion reaction, like you would want in a reactor, so that you could do things like the sun and just have this continuous great output of energy. We've not been able to do that yet, just because of the need to have these incredible pressures forcing the atoms together to get fusion to happen. Like we can do it by pointing a bunch of lasers at a small, tiny amount of material, and you'll get a fusion reaction. But you're dumping a lot of energy into those lasers to make that fusion happen, and it's not currently scalable.
Well, if you could talk to the other scientists about that, it'd be quite good if we could get that.
Right.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but we asked you guys to handle that a good 50 years ago, so I don't know what you've been doing. But
there's the joke that fusion is the energy of the future, or is like 20 years away and has been for 50 years. There's a little bit of that. It's a hard technical problem. I have some friends who work they'll work for the Department of Energy and work on things like that. And it's just a very, very tough problem.
What's the smallest size for a fission reactor that you could have? So when I think of a fission reactor, I think of one of two things. I either think of, and he's probably a fusion reactor, I either think of the Heart and Iron Man, which is probably fusion, or so stuff that we could actually do. I think of like the big towers with the Simpsons.
Right.
Or alternately the god-awful Soviet architecture of Chernobyl. But either way, a very large building. Could you, if you had if you had like a 3-story tall, mech robot, could you even have a nuclear power source in it, or would that be smaller than the actual nuclear power plant itself?
I mean, you can make smaller energy sources or smaller nuclear reactors. I'm trying to think of how big. There's the Los Angeles class nuclear submarine that uses a smallish nuclear reactor. That's still fairly large. I think it weighs like 2,000 tons.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But it also puts out like 80 megawatts of electrical power, which I ran through the calculations, and it's enough to swing your mech's giant arms. Now, you don't want to run the legs at the same time. You might want to shut the arms down so you've got power to run the legs.
Wait, hold on.
But you could run legs or run arms.
So like, let's say like a 3-story robot. We're only going to be able to operate the legs or the arms at one time, even with nuclear power?
Yeah, potentially. This is the problem that you run into when you're trying to go to space. Like, I want to go further in space, so I need more fuel, but more fuel is heavier, so I need to lift that up. So I'll add more fuel, but then I've got to be able to lift that off the ground.
Yeah.
And so you reach this sort of runaway process where my rocket is, 96% fuel and 4% cargo or even, 98% fuel and structure and 2% cargo.
Right.
You sort of run into these problems as you try to scale up. Adding more power requires more structure and more weight, which means you need more power, which means you need more structure and more weight, which means you need more power.
I got a workaround. I'm going to run this by you.
All right.
What if, you know how you'll have like, a sprinkler that's attached to a hose? What if we just have a really long hose for our giant robot that pumps in diesel, and we just we paint it green so it blends in with the lawn and hope nobody notices it. And granted, he's tethered, but he's got he's got like a 1 mile hose radius.
I figure you just drape the green screen over that, and then you take it out in post so nobody notices it.
Perfect. That would work even better. Okay, so let me. So it sounds like we've got our work cut out for us building a giant robot. Out of let's talk about the information processing. I am guessing that it doesn't make a huge difference in terms of speed between organic nerve endings versus an electrical system. I think it would if we were talking about something the size of a planet. But my guess is for anything with even for megafauna, it's not going to make a difference because it's within milliseconds or something like that. Is there any particular advantage that you'd have having an electronic information system as opposed to an organic one when you get it that big?
I'm not sure because I would actually steal inspiration from the animal kingdom for some of this, because there are a lot of animals. Well, and even we have this to a certain extent, where you've got a lot of processing that happens in the brain, but then you have these neurons sort of clustered together that are subtasked to run things. So we've got a lot of these clusters of neurons in our spine that take care of a lot of the motion, the movement of arms and legs and stuff like that. So the signals don't have to go all the way from your brain to the arm.
Is that like if I put my hand on a stove and it jumps back before I even know what happened?
Right. It goes to the spine, and then it's short-circuited, and you get the reaction from that part of your spine that says, we're going to take care of this right now. We've got some reactions to take care of. You see that especially in animals like octopuses. Like 2/3 of its nervous tissue is out in its arms. They have those very complex arms that do a lot of movement, and they have those clusters of nerves, those I think they're called central pattern generators, that handle a lot of that, to the point, and this is gross, please do not do this, but if you have an octopus's arm detached and then put it in water and then put in a little poison, the arm will shy away from that poison even without the rest of the octopus attached. Like, it will still react to those stimuli because of those clusters of nerves that are there in the arms and not in the central brain part of the of the octopus.
So then if I'm following you, the kind of instinctive, I feel free to correct me on this, the kind of instinctive reptile brain part, like the reactive non-thinking part, that's in the arms. So there is like a neural connection there, but the cognitive function of the octopus being able to recognize you, or I want to go inside a Pepsi bottle or whatever, that's in its brain. But a lot of the tactile things that it does, like the equivalent, I guess that would be the equivalent of like if our legs had like walking neurons in them and would just keep going on their own. Like it's not thinking, but it just does its own thing without me having to worry about it.
Right, exactly. So
this sounds great. I would love to have that. I would be able to exercise so much better. I'd be like, y'all just take care of jogging. I'm going to be watching Netflix.
I'm going to sleep. Take a quick nap. So especially if we talk about having something that large, as fast as we can send electronic signals, we don't necessarily want to take all of that time to send the signals up to the brain part of the robot where presumably the pilot is and have the pilot react. There's a lot of that lower level stuff like balance and similar. Shove that down in the legs, put some small processors down there to handle the motors and to have the sensors that know what's going on, and let them take care of all of that instead of centralizing it all up in the brain portion of the robot.
Wonderful. When you and I spoke prior to our chat, you had mentioned that in theory, if you had a giant robot, that it might actually be more efficient to have two people piloting it than one. And walk me through that, because I've never been good at a two-legged race or a three-legged race. Like I would imagine I would not be very useful in a horse costume. So like trying to pilot like a giant robot with another individual seems like something I'd be bad at.
So this is something that Pacific Rim introduced, that you've got two pilots that are together in, quote unquote, the drift. So their minds are linked and they're working together, and they have to be drift compatible for that to happen. And it's a great storytelling device. I loved it a lot, but I was like, that is the goofiest thing ever. There's no way. So I started looking into various bits of research about human-computer interfaces, especially brain-computer interfaces. And there were some studies a number of years ago where they hooked two people up to EEG. So they had the little sensors on their head to register their brain activity. And then they had a little spacecraft on a screen that you could control by thinking at it. Mm-hmm. So you would think in certain ways that the EEG would pick up the pattern of neurons firing in your brain, and that would turn into spacecraft motion. So they would have one person pilot the spacecraft. They'd say, okay, we want you to take the spacecraft maybe from the bottom left of the screen to the top right in a curve. So you sort of go along the bottom and then go up the side. And one person could do that okay. But when they had two people working together, so they had the signals from both brains controlling the spacecraft, it actually worked better and had a smoother flight. That there was something about averaging the signals from two people that gave them better results than just one person. And I was floored. I could not believe that was an actual thing that researchers had checked on and that worked.
So walk me through how that would, like, would the idea be that if you and I were plugged into this drift and we're making a spaceship alter course on a screen, that if I'm doing it by myself, I'm kind of doing that, but a part of my brain is thinking about bills that I need to pay, and like, that orderly looked at me funny, I wonder if he doesn't like me. And you're doing the same kind of asinine stuff, but if we average it, the system can go, you know what, that's all asinine stuff, just focus on the thing they're both thinking about.
Kind of, yeah. Well, and any measurement we make of someone's brain activity is going to have some noise in it. We don't have perfect sensors, so the measurements will fluctuate. Not just because we don't always stay on task, but just the act of trying to measure it. And so
there is no USB plug for the human brain. We're not directly tapping it as of yet.
Yeah, we don't yet have that part of the cyberpunk future. Mm-hmm. So making measurements from two people focusing on a common goal helps get rid of some of that noise and could potentially deal with one of the pilots having a moment of inattention or being distracted by something. It's an intriguing result. I don't know that we go straight from there to now we're linked and share memories like they do in Pacific Rim, but I was very excited to see something that I thought was neat from a story perspective, but could have no basis in science. Instead, had some studies that said, maybe this is a reasonable thing to do.
That, you know what, this actually makes sense to me. So like me hosting a podcast, I now do the editing on the show, and I do the cleanup on it. This isn't exactly how the editing works, but you could design an editing system where we've got two separate tracks, as you and I are doing right now. We could do it and say, ignore anything that's not on both tracks. That way, if there's a clicking noise on my end, or you've got static on your end or something, the program would know, because it's not correlated jointly, to go ahead and drop that. So I could see that kind of thing working.
Yeah. The more I thought about it, the more I was like, okay, there is some sense to this. Like, I could see this having benefits enough to have two pilots in there.
Okay, where are we on mind-machine interface technology? I'll tell you where I dropped off. I used to work for the House of Representatives. I was a staffer, and the military everybody would come by and talk to us at some point, and there were all sorts of events going on. But the military would come by periodically and invite staffers to check out various technologies. And this would have been in 2010, so it's a full decade ago. But I was blown away, because one of the things that they were showing off was there was a screen, much like you're describing. There was a headset you could put on, and then I believe reading alpha waves and beta waves, people could make a ball jump up and down. Like there was a very rudimentary kind of Mario Brothers type figure that you could move with your mind without having any actual wet conduit in your brain. It was just suction cups and that kind of thing. And the idea for it, I think for them, it was less direct military application and more to do with therapeutic application for wounded veterans. In theory, we could eventually get to the point where, rather than having a giant mech suit, they've got a one-man mech suit that a quadriplegic person can now move their limbs and that kind of thing, which would be great. I was blown away by that. Because that for me was a whole paradigm shift of, we just went from cyberpunk mind-machine interface technology being complete science fiction to now it's real. It's just very blunt, but it's a thing. So, and that's the last I'd had any contact with it was about 10 years ago. So where are we with it now?
People are still continuing to do research to give better sensors so that you can read brain activity or detect brain activity. I don't want to say read, because reading thoughts is not a thing, but you can sense certain kinds of brain activity, and you can train a computer to recognize certain patterns and amplify them and react to them. There's been a lot of research in that in prosthesis, for example. There's a doctor, I don't know if he's still at Duke. He was, as of a couple of years ago, named Dr. Nicolalis, who was looking at a lot of those either muscle to machine or brain to machine interfaces for prosthetics, and had a person with robotic prosthetic legs kick out the first ball at, I think, the 2014 World Cup championship match. So a lot of it has been better sensors so that you can detect the signals better. And then some of it has benefited from some of the revolutions in machine learning, so that you can say, we don't know exactly what to look for, but we can give you an input and say, look for more inputs that are structured kind of like this. We're not going to tell you exactly, but we're going to give you a lot of examples, and you can learn from that to say, all right, this class of inputs are the thing that I'm looking for, and I will translate it to this kind of movement.
And as I understand it, machine learning is where, if we want to teach Google to automatically recognize a picture of a cat, we give it we get 100 pictures of cats and 100 pictures of not cats, and tell them these are all cats. And basically, rather than going, cats have ears, cats have teeth, we just give more and more input and then clarify, no, that one is a cat, that one's not a cat. And it'll basically come up with its own algorithm based on the input, rather than us trying to specifically program it.
Right. You just get a giant pile of data that some poor people have had to sort through and say, yes, cat, no, not cat. And you pile it in the hopper, and the algorithm essentially comes up with its own way of sorting stuff together. And this is a technique that has been around. They first started looking at especially neural nets, where they were trying to simulate how we think brains work in terms of signals passing from neurons to neurons, a neuronic layer to a neuronic layer. So it's doing some sort of filtering and similar. And they worked with that some in the 60s. There was another surge of interest in it in the 80s and 90s, but it never worked super well. The real change was when Google was able to say, well, look at all this data we've got. What if we use all of this data? And that turned out to be one of the keys, was having just tremendous amounts of data to train on, so that you could start to tease out the patterns that were underlying all these piles of data.
Oh my God! I just remembered that when Google, I think they've switched their photograph systems a couple of times. It was like Picasa, and now there's some other thing. But I remember for a while there was visual face recognition technology where it would go, "Hey, look at these 5 photos. Is this Nick?" And you'd go, those 4 are Nick. That one's a cat. And so they basically were able to incorporate all of us into that on a minor level to be able to get better and better at it.
Yeah, Google had the advantage that a lot of the tagging, the saying that this is a cat or this is not a cat, we did it for them. Mm-hmm. Like, we will put pictures up on the internet and say, my cat spots. And so it says, oh, this is a picture that has the word cat associated with it. It's probably a cat. Mm-hmm. So that has distributed the effort of tagging all of this information in ways that if you just set some poor intern down with giant mugs of coffee and I guess a million years, would be difficult to reproduce.
So if Tesla's new mandate was to move beyond automated cars to automated robots walking around. Granted, you and I would prefer to pilot this ourselves. That's going to be more fun. But for whatever reason, we need the robot to change lamps in our local town or something. Would they be relying on machine learning in order to do the navigation systems? If this is a hydrant, this is a kid, don't hit these things. That's a leaf. That's fine.
Probably some of it. So humans have evolved to have very, very good pattern recognition, and we don't have anything just quite that good at general pattern recognition. We always end up having to do specific kinds of pattern recognition. It's one of the things that makes autonomous cars so difficult, because it turns out beating hundreds and thousands and millions of years of evolution is difficult. Mm-hmm. We're still working on that. But where you get a benefit from machine vision and similar kinds of applications, one, the computer doesn't get tired or inattentive. It will just run and run and run and run and run. The second is you can have the system looking in so many more different directions than where a human can look. So you can do essentially computer-aided guidance where it does some filtering and then presents information that has been filtered down to the user, so the user is not overwhelmed by all of these symbols popping up on their HUD saying, there's all these things all around you. So that's one of the places where I can see a benefit for computer vision and similar kinds of sensor processing in our giant robot. Let it take care of some of the lower stuff that we don't care as much about, and forward the things that are really critical for the human to decide to the pilot.
Right. So am I gonna fire my awesome Gatling gun at the blimp, or am I gonna fire my awesome Gatling gun at the other mech warrior? Whereas the walking along a street or something, that you would give that to the robot. Do you think we are with say automated driving? Do you think that's something that we're likely to actually arrive at? Like, as of now, it's sort of automated assisted driving. I know that there have been limited instances where, like, a drunk will pass out in their Tesla and it'll take him home, and that's great. But at the same time, it's not foolproof, and so it's not really universally roadworthy yet. Do you think it'll get to that point?
I hope so, but there's a whole lot of work that has to happen before before we get there, especially because any kind of computer vision is tough. Like, we work very hard so that computers don't lose track when an object goes from being inside, or like being in the full sun, to going in the shade. Because if you walk from the sun to the shade, the actual color that you perceive changes. Right. But our brain is like, oh, I know that's the same thing. Yeah. And so lies to you about what's happened. Well, we're having to teach those same kind of lies to computer systems so that they can deal with changes in color or changes in shape, which turn out to be really difficult. Or our brain has evolved a lot of tricks to guess about the kinds of distances things are. You know, is this a coffee cup in front of something else, for example? Because we get a little bit of stereo information from our two eyes, but you can still navigate around even if you don't have that kind of depth perception. But we're having to teach those same kind of tricks to computers so that they can do some of those same kinds of processing, even though we kind of but don't totally understand what's going on in our brain when that happens. Like, we can look at, for example, optical illusions and get an idea of the kinds of hacks our brain is doing to deal with changes in color and shape and all those sorts of things.
Well, like, am I right in thinking on that note that just in terms of logistical processing power, in terms of something like picking up a ball and throwing it, like, the human brain is still a superior processor to most robotic technology we have. Like we can, like, chess is something that we've been able to pretty much kick out of the park for robots, because they can memorize every single, they can draw on every move ever logged with chess, but like just swinging a baseball bat, that kind of thing. We're just better adapted to it and have all the neurons necessary for it. So we're still better at piloting.
I would say that we are better at unusual and generalist tasks. Like, we can get a computer to be really good at some things, but it takes a whole lot of work. And then that program is focused on that one thing. Mm-hmm. We're sort of a generalist in that way, in that we can do physical kinds of things. We can do all kinds of different mental tasks. We've got all of these skills that we have built up. But I can't take IBM Watson and say, now you drive a car. I've got to have a completely different system. Right. For that. So I don't know where this is all going to end up. There's, of course, a big debate about what are the things that humans can do that we can't necessarily get computers to recognize. And computers definitely have an edge in crunching just tremendous amounts of data and sifting through those. But at the same time, the results that they give aren't necessarily, sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not great, and they still depend a lot on humans doing the pre-sorting for them to train them. Folks are working on ways to take training from one application and use that to train up a new application that has slightly different goals and different inputs, but we're not there yet.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, I'll go ahead and stop it there because I'm about to kick it into apocalyptic stuff, but that's a whole nother, getting into Terminator is a whole nother genre of robots. So I'll pause that for now.
I understood.
But it was a pleasure talking to you. And for people that are interested in your work and just kind of want to follow you, where's the best place to check you out?
Easiest place to get to all of my other stuff is to find me on Twitter. My handle is @Sargent, SARGENT, kind of like John Singer Sargent. Or you can find me at my website at stephen.granades.com.
Normally on this program, every week, fellow comedian and friend of mine, Nick Sperduti, we visit some other world and we perform comedy there, and then we report back to you on what that world is like. Now, obviously, we haven't been able to do that during lockdown. We're under quarantine conditions just like you at home, so we haven't been doing any stand-up or improv anywhere, and we haven't been able to visit other planets because we're staying in Nick's two-bedroom apartment with our Wookiee entourage and our Gungan and some porgs and an iguana and a droid. It's been pretty tight, but last week we gave you an update on how we're doing. And this week, what I thought would be really fun, because we've never had her on the program before, is we're going to bring on my girlfriend, Chewbacca. She's one of the Wookiees. And she wanted to talk to me about something important, and I thought, you know what, this is a great opportunity to bring her on and introduce her to people. And she said, no, I just want to talk to you personally. And I was like, nonsense. You know what? We might as well do this right now. And anything you say to me, you can say to everybody that listens to the program. So I want to give a big welcome to my Wookiee girlfriend, Chewbacca.
Andrew, before she comes in the room, I got to be honest. I was talking to her. I think I know why she wants to come on the podcast today.
Talk about sci-fi? What? You're breaking up with me? Oh my! Is this some kind of joke?
Oh God, I didn't want you to find out this way. Oh man, this is gonna be really awkward for me personally.
What? How can you even say that? I thought this was like a really snug honeymoon. It was going so well, and you're breaking up with me. Oh.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Nick, did you know she was going to break up with me?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's just not fair. That's just okay. Okay. So, yes, I've been spending a lot of time on the Oculus Quest. That is true. All right. I'll acknowledge that because I think mental health is important and I have been taking care of my mental health. And also I spend like 4 hours a day playing virtual date with an avatar of Chewbacca, right? I made an avatar of you, baby. Like it's the same as hanging out with you. It's just that you can go do whatever you want while I hang out with a virtual version of you that I made in a game.
Yeah, that's the problem, I think.
I don't even understand this.
Andrew, I'll just say from my personal perspective, I have noticed you guys growing farther apart because anytime she wants to talk, you are playing on the Quest.
But I always make myself available for sex. That's always there. Like in terms of just, direct bodily communication, I'm there. Yeah, for conversational purposes, I'm generally talking to my virtual girlfriend. It's not a virtual girlfriend, the character that I'm dating in the dating game on Oculus Quest. But I'm trying to get to level 15 on that. And I'm at level 12.
And yeah, I mean, I don't blame her. That kind of does feel like cheating to me too.
Okay, fine. I spend a fair amount of time, the occasional 12 to 14 hours a day on my Oculus Quest going through a dating game with a avatar of a girlfriend. Fine, I acknowledge that. Chewbacca, I'm sorry, we're just going to air the laundry right here. You watch a lot of porn. And how's that supposed to make me feel? Yeah, and I find that kind of weird, to be honest. Like, okay, so Chewbacca got into deep fakes here a few months ago and has got really good at deep fake technology, which, if you're not familiar with this, you can take somebody's face and basically graft it onto somebody else in porn.
Is that what you guys did with my camera?
Yeah, that's what we did. I thought it was just a one-off, though. Now she's made like a whole porn library of me, and whenever she watches porn of me, I get mad because I'm like, you're putting like, seems to me like that guy has way more muscles than I do. And then Chewbacca, you are like, it's your face, so you can't be mad at me. It's not cheating if it's you. Yeah, exactly. I don't okay, yes, technically, Chewbacca, technically you are watching porn of me, but it's on a variety of bodies from a variety of different species. And so it kind of makes me feel weird and also a little bit inadequate. And I recognize that you lawyered me with your deep fake thing so that it's not really cheating, but it still doesn't make me feel very good. Wait, hold on, Chewbacca. Wait, how are you seeing this pan out during a lockdown? Because we're still both living here. Are we just going to live here? Point. And like, it's going to be like, have you ever dated a coworker before? That's awkward. We're living in tight, like we're basically living in a submarine together. And now we're going to be exes living in this. This is going to be super difficult.
Hey, listen, this is a family show. We don't curse on this show, okay?
Yeah, Chewbacca, we don't like, that is, I've never even heard that portmanteau before, but it was absolutely curdling.
But I do kind of agree with the point of it.
Okay.
I mean, it is kind of true. I mean, listen, maybe you don't give I'm not going to say it, that, you guys have to live together after you just went out of this relationship. Sure, I get that. But Heaton's also not wrong, where it's going to be super awkward for everybody else involved, including all of your Wookiee friends and me and Megan and Joe Blow. But
Chewbacca, let me just give you a preview of what you done walked into for the next couple of weeks. One, I am not talking to you. That's right. I am only talking to you through other Wookiees. I'm going to do that thing. Exactly. Thank you for pointing that out, ex-girlfriend Chewbacca. Nick, would you kindly tell my ex-girlfriend that I am no longer talking to her?
I don't like this. Chewbacca, he's no longer talking to you.
Uh-huh.
She said, she keeps saying the same, go F yourself, I guess is the best translation.
Oh, is that what she said? Nick, would you please tell Chewbacca that I am so going to jump on Tinder tonight, and I'm probably going to hook up with a rando and endanger all of our lives because of this.
You heard him. I'm not going to say it.
Yep, that's right. No, I will use protection. I will use protection because I don't want to knock anybody up. But that, you can't, that won't do nothing for the virus. And I'm just going to track some strange back into this apartment. And that's what happens. I'm a man with needs. And if you're going to just break up with me because of some dumb thing about Oculus Quest, then I'm going to get satisfied elsewhere. And you're bringing danger on everybody here except the iguana. I don't think they can get coronavirus.
Here's what I'm going to say. First of all, Heaton, it's not fair to hold her hostage in a relationship just because you're technically hostage in this house and you can't really do much. Number one. Number two, this relationship needed to end clearly based on all these previous examples. So I agree that this should be over. And I think what we'll do, classic sitcom style, we will draw a line down the apartment.
Okay.
You will be on one side. Bex will be on the other side.
Okay.
And you guys can... Hey, no, listen. Yes, and I'm saying I agree with you. I'm just saying I think it's best... Well, no. First of all, we didn't even say what side of the apartment yet. Okay, so that's one thing.
I call starboard.
This isn't a ship.
Oh.
I get to pick.
Okay.
Well, we'll have EJ weigh in because he is the mayor.
Yeah.
Edward Jefferson. But I think that is our only option of getting through this sanely. And I want no other communicado from you two with a representative. In fact, you know what? I think we should have AJ-19 on so that we could try to sort this out to make sure that you guys are
great. You know what I would love? I would love to talk to a droid who thinks logically and rationally instead of flying off the handle and letting emotions and flightiness dictate how he operates. So that sounds great to me.
Says the person who just said he was going to go on Tinder and raw dog a bunch of randoms. I mean, Christ.
Well, in my case, I'm just, you know what? I'm just having to deal with a lot right now, and yeah, this is a.
Well, so is she. I got you back, Chewbacca. I love you too.
Well, I'm glad that you guys are handling this okay, and I just want to be clear on this, Nick. A lot of the time when people break up, friends kind of split. And I want you to know that in this situation, you better fucking have my back.
Listen,
this is a civil war in the apartment, and I want to know whose side you're on, and I expect everybody to rally around me and ostracize my evil ex-girlfriend.
Okay, here's what I'm going to say. I love a good revolt. You know that. You know that about me very well.
I do.
But in this case, I do think that we can be friends still. I think this will all work out. I think you guys, as long as you're thinking rationally, we're going to get AJ-19 in here because I want to sort this out because I want you guys to remain friends if you want. But I think we should try our best to at least be civil in this relationship.
Okay, that is super unfair. Nick, did you hear what she said?
Yeah.
How dare you? You shut your filthy mouth, you shaggy gutter trollop. Say that again. I dare you to say that about me again. Fuck you, space trash. Oh, you want to break some of Nick's plates? Two can play at that game. Yeah. Take that, and another plate, and a teacup. Oh, great. Whip the sink out of the kitchen just like your trashy plebeian parents did back on Kashyyyk before they got kicked out of a mobile home in a tree. The hell I can't. I'll break as many plates as I want.
Hey, break it up. Hey, separate. Tarful, get in here.
You shut the hell up, Tarful. You stay out of this. I don't want your input. You're not a part of this. You just shut up, Tarful.
Don't throw that. Ow. Shit. Okay, I'm done with this shit. That's enough.
Okay. One final question. And then I'm going to put my mask on and go take a walk around the block to try and absorb all this. There's been a lot going on. I need some me time. And when I say that, what I mean is I'm going to put my Oculus Quest on and put on the app where I walk around the block because I don't want to go outside.
Yeah, no, we got that.
Yeah. So just final question. I'm respectfully addressing you, Chewbacca. I'm not going to go through Nick. For Wookiee Love Day, you gave me a card that had coupons for 3 sex in them, and I have not used those sex coupons yet. I just want to make sure that you are going to acknowledge the validity of a gift that you gave me, and I don't care when we use them, but I just want to remind you that there's 3 sex coupons in there, and they're not used. Well, good for you. Glad to know that your IOUs are worthless.
Yeah, I don't blame her. I think that once the relationship's over, those are void. I even remember it saying that in the back of the...
Hold on, let me check.
The card.
God damn it, it does say that.
Void in case of broken relationship.
She wrote that on the back.
It's right there.
Prescient, yeah.
I mean, it was smart of her, to be fair. So here's what I'll say. I think we should close after this. But I think of both of you as very close to me.
I agree.
I think together we can sort this out and find a loving solution. You guys are family, okay? You were family before you started dating. Let's not forget that. We've had love for each other in more ways than just romantically. So we need to just take a breath. We're going to sort this out. For right now, we're going to separate you guys to make this easier. And then we're going to just try to come to some sort of a summit so that we can sort this out and we can get to a place of normalcy amongst the apartment dwellers.
I think she said it best. I agree.
I agree as well. Very eloquent. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you, Chewbacca. That's the show. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Stephen Granade, for coming on and budging the needle just that much more towards me potentially building a giant destructive robot with which to conquer Tulsa. Thank you, Nick Sperduti, for continuing to allow me to live in your apartment during lockdown along with our various friends. Remembering that I have seniority over all of them. All of them. Nick.